Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review, and today, from DC Collectibles in their DC Comics Icons line, we are featuring Deathstroke, the very popular mercenary character from the DC Universe. Alright, so this is actually an older action figure. I purchased this years ago. And this, truth be told, I've actually unboxed this figure already. It's just that I've been reviewing some Deathstroke figures, and even though I've displayed this video, even though even though I've displayed this action figure in previous videos, I don't think I've ever actually showcased this figure on its own. So today we're gonna take a look at it, fully unbox it, and just check it out. So if you're unfamiliar with the DC Icons line, years ago, DC Collectibles, it's DC, they have their own line of toys. They released what was a line of action figures called Icons. And their intent with Icons was to take the most iconic versions of the DC superheroes and villains and present them in action figure form. This line debuted, I want to say, at least 12 years ago. And when this line came out, Mattel still had their license, and they were producing their own 6-inch scale DC superheroes for their DC Classics and DC Universe line of action figures. So when these came out, it was kind of, as a collector, it was kind of weird because it provided me another option for collecting DC figures in this kind of like slightly larger scale. But at the same time, it was kind of disjarring because these figures, even though they're maybe 6 inches, they didn't scale well with the Mattel stuff. The Mattel figures were still slightly larger and bigger, while these were kind of a little bit on the smaller side. Even though they kind of shared a similar scale, it's kind of weird because for the most part, toy companies, they'll say, this figure's a 6-inch scale or a 7-inch scale, but every company determines the scale differently. So for me, it was cool that DC provided this option, but at the same time, as someone who was already collecting the Mattel action figures, it was just kind of weird because this wouldn't stand well next to a Mattel figure just because of the size difference. All right, so this figure, it's the package design is nice. It's very uniform with a lot of the DC Collectibles action figures. For example, here's the DC Icons Lex Luthor. It shares a very similar box design. And then this box design continued for many years later. We got, the DC Collectibles black and white figures, and they came in the same box design. Here's the Jim Lee Batman. And then even with the more somewhat recent stuff, they continued the same box design for the live action figures. Here's the Arrowverse Deathstroke. So if you're a mint in-box collector, it's kind of cool that, a lot of your packages are kind of uniform with one another. But back to Deathstroke, the figure, it's elegantly displayed. You have the figure occupying the left side of the box, and then his accessories are on the side. He comes with two different portrait options. He has the unmasked head, with the eye patch, and then he has the masked head. He comes with the 2 different hands. So here, I think these are the fist options. He comes with his bow staff, his trademark sword, his assault gun, and then his revolver. And then on the back, here were some of the other figures in the Icons line. So he belonged to the same wave as Swamp Thing, the new 52 designed Wonder Woman, the new 52 designed Cyborg, and then the Deathstroke figure. So Deathstroke here, this one really captures the essence of the much beloved version of the character that was illustrated by the late artist George Perez. George Perez, he really left, a huge impression when he illustrated Teen Titans. And, for many people, this is really the definitive iconic version of Deathstroke. So if you're a fan of like old school OG Deathstroke and you have fond memories of the 80s and the Teen Titans and George Perez, this is the figure that you want. Alright, so this figure also comes with an instruction manual, and the instruction manual is actually across the board for all the figures in this particular wave. So for example, if you bought the Wonder Woman, they kind of instruct you on how to insert the shield. You have to remove the gauntlet, remove the hand. For Deathstroke here, they kind of show you that, you can swap out his hands, swap out his head. And then for the other figures, more of the same. Alright, so the figure, it's really well presented. The one thing that really catches my eye is the color scheme. They use a really beautiful shade of it's almost like a candy or metallic blue for his scale mail. It's really loud and it really pops, and it kind of really embodies that color palette of the 1980s, and it's just really beautiful, especially with the contrast against this orange. It's really striking. So the one downside with this figure is that, for example, let's get a ruler out here so we can measure them. So this guy comes in at a little under 6.5 inches. So, even though it's kind of a 6-inch scale action figure, it's smaller than a Mattel figure. And as you can see, he's kind of waifish and thin. Even though he's has a muscular build, it's not as bulky or as muscular as an action figure as when you compare it to some of the other action figures during this time period, like when a Marvel Legends or a Mattel figure was released. These guys definitely felt a little bit off. But that's not a negative because, the presentation and the quality of the figure, it's really well done. As you can see here, everything about it is just so clean and well executed that if there's any shortcomings, they're easily forgivable, just because these were really nice, almost boutique level of an action figure. For his accessories, you get the alternate portrait, the masthead, and as I pointed out before, the 2 fists and the additional weapons. Alright, so for now we're just going to put this aside and we're going to take a look at the action figure itself. So the sculpting, it's very clean, it's very basic. It's not like overly done. It's detailed where it needs to be detailed. They don't really take any unnecessary unnecessary embellishments. For the most part, everything that you saw in the comic book is kind of represented in this action figure. The scale mail is, for me, probably the most eye-catching thing about it. Besides the beautiful choice of colors, it's just really, really clean and really well sculpted. If you collected some of the Toy Biz action figures during the early 2000s and mid 2000s, sometimes figures that had this kind of detail, they always looked a little bit too dirty or a little bit on the muddy side in terms of the sculpting and the crispness of the detail. Whereas this one, it was really, really clean, and it's almost flawless in the execution. Now, since it's an older action figure, the articulation is going to be a little bit limited, so we're going to take a look at that right now. His head rotates, doesn't want to look down, looks up just about there. He doesn't have any articulation at the neck, unfortunately. His arms rotate, they go outward, and you can kind of hear it creaking because I can't force it up any further because the arm muscle is colliding with the shoulder there. So even though it has the articulation that it's meant for, the range of motion is kind of limited. He does have a bicep cut, so allows for a swivel. Double pinned elbows, which is nice. Articulated wrists. He has a cut mid-torso here, so he could kind of swivel a little bit, but not too much. Again, it's kind of hindered by the fact that as soon as you start trying to twist it, the muscles start like colliding with each other, and it kind of prevents it from happening. For me, it almost seems like it's pointless having the articulation. I kind of feel like if you're going to provide the articulation, make sure that you're giving us the range of movement. Otherwise, it's very pointless. If you give us the articulation and the cut, but it doesn't do anything, it's almost kind of pointless. So for me, I'd prefer it if they lost that mid-torso cut and just have a cleanly sculpted figure. Because, at this point, it doesn't really do anything. But keep in mind, this figure came out years ago, and I think they weren't as keen on paying attention to those kind of details. I think they were more concerned with giving us the articulation, but not being concerned about, the range of motion. This guy does not swivel at the waist. Again, it's kind of disappointing because it seems like for that kind of motion, they're kind of dependent on this mid-torso cut. But again, it doesn't want to move, so it's kind of pointless. He does crunch forward, arches back. Legs kick up, about there. And they kick out, about like that. Double pin knees, and ankle articulation. So this figure, it does feel a little bit dated. It's definitely a product of its time. But for me, I love this era of Teen Titans. I was a big fan of comic book artist George Perez. And so for me, this is always going to be like the definitive version of Deathstroke. Even though I'm very, very, into like the modern take of the character. I love the way the character's portrayed in the Arrowverse by actor Manu Bennett. I love Joe Manganiello's version of Deathstroke, from the Snyderverse films. And the Arkham, or not Arkham, is it Arkham? I think it's Arkham Origins, the video game, is when Deathstroke. That figure is amazing to look at. But, I'm always going to have a special place in my heart for the George Perez design. It really embodies, the costume design and aesthetics of the 1980s. This feels very much like a 1980s superhero. In some ways, it kind of resembles Captain America with the boots and the gloves and the scale mail. It kind of feels a little bit like Taskmaster, and even like in some regards, like the X-Men character Cyclops. But it's a good figure overall. Is it something you need? I think it's dependent on, whether or not you're a fan of this specific line of action figure or the comic books. If you're kind of bored in like the last 20 years, this character design might escape you. And if that's the case, I would suggest, going for one of the more recent McFarlane figures. But this figure is worth hunting down if you're interested in it. I'm not sure of the secondary market price right now, but if you can find this guy for, $40 or less, I'd say pull the trigger on it. It's really a nice, elegant piece. It's not as overstated as like a modern action figure. It's very elegant in its design. And even the box art's is really nice and well presented. So for me, on a scale of 1 to 10, if I reviewed this figure when it first came out, I'd probably easily give it like a 9 back then. But by today's standards, I'm going to say visually it's 10. It's perfect to look at, but The engineering leaves a lot to be desired. So in that case, you know, in terms of the articulation and whatnot, it's probably about a 7. Okay, so let's wrap this one up. Once again, my name is Lou. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're a returning viewer or subscriber, thank you so much for your continued support. I greatly appreciate it. So until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll see you at the next one. All right, later.